Good morning, Arquettes. I'm just trying again. We had a go last night and I'm just seeing how this sounds today because I had all kinds of technical problems. So I'm going to take you through a method today that I've called the Hagrid method, and how Hagrid, who is a dog, not the character from Harry Potter, taught me to walk to heel very nicely, and then how I've applied that to other dogs that I've worked with. I just want to say it is absolutely possible, and I'm kind of sitting here last night reviewing what I said last night and thinking nobody knows how bad my lead walking actually was. That one time I was literally dragged by four dogs through a field of cows to get to a dog on the other side of it, whilst there was a man in a tractor looking at me. I have faced all of these problems. I have been walking 90 kilograms of dogs who've decided that it was a really good time to go across the field and see a dog. I have had all kinds of problems if you know Heston, and I'll tell you why. Because I walked him on an extendable lead when he was a puppy, and I didn't teach the value of the things that I'm going to teach today. And at the age of 5, totally turned that around, as you can see from this lovely picture. And then I've got Liddy, who was in the shelter for 3 years, who I walked her. I allowed her to pull like an absolute maniac because it was her like one moment of time out. So today we're going to talk about all things loose lead walking. And for those of you with hounds, with huskies, I'm particularly aiming it for those kind of people who think that it's impossible to walk certain types of dog without using all kinds of horrible tools that are very ineffective anyway. Okay, so why can't your dog walk on the lead? Because it's not just about training. I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain because it is important. But if training with a solution, everybody's dog will be able to walk on lead. Liddy can do loads of things perfectly. She can pick an ace of spades out of a deck of cards. So it's not about training, just about training. It's about much, much more than that. It's also about a lack of teaching right from puppyhood. As I said from Heston, I allowed him to pull for 18 months on an extendable lead, and I also let him off the lead when he didn't have good recall. What I did in his adolescence was turn him into an amazing hunting dog. As I said to some guy, I was offered once €500 for Heston, because it was so efficient at finding things. If it moved in our environment, he would find it, and the chase was everything for him. And as he grew older, he kind of specialised into particular kinds of chasing. So he really likes chasing things across open fields, kind of almost a bit greyhoundy, I guess, and massive stamina. So unlike a greyhound who'd probably quit after 20 minutes, Heston would still be out there chasing. What did he want to chase? House martins. He was chasing house martins for about 25 minutes, just rounding round in figures of 8 for the sheer joy of it. And I think that's another part of the problem as well, is that a lot of people who have got dogs who pull on the lead then let their dogs off lead, and most of the time in rural France that's okay. We don't really come into much conflict with many other things. They might chase the odd deer or so on. It's very unlikely they're going to be able to catch it, but they do have a try. And what we create are monsters. We create dogs who've got no recall and can't walk on the lead, so we let them off in this kind of misguided notion that they need more exercise. So we'll talk about that as well today. And as I said with Heston, what I did was create a dog who was entirely turned on by the environment, and I would, even if I took him out for a 2 or 3 hour walk, I didn't get a single check-in from him, not once. He didn't look at me. It was as if I was a taxi who got him to that place, and then I would let him off the lead. He would rampage. Luckily, I always managed to get him back, hence he's here now. But I was going down the line and thinking, okay, well, I'll just get a Tractive, those devices, the GPS ones, so that I can find him again, rather than thinking, do you know what? It would be actually better to walk him on a lead, because he was hell on earth to walk on a lead, because by that time he was then 35 kilogram of dog, and it was really, really hard to walk him on the lead. Especially then when I started adopting other dogs that were pretty big as well. So all of the time we've got this kind of competition with the environment, and that's really hard, especially if our dogs are only going out for, their 1 hour a day. And I think we have that kind of feeling inside of us, don't we, that this is their time. I would not be out there. I'm going to go out and it's already cold out there. I can already see there's frost on the car. I do not want to go out at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to be out there for the dogs, not for me. I don't go for walks at 8 o'clock in the morning. I would like, maybe a weekly little hike somewhere. I do not want to be walking my dogs every single day. So I'm appreciative that many of us think that it's the dog's time. If we're out there and we're walking our dogs, we know it's our dog's time. And so I think a lot of us feel a little bit, I don't know, ambivalent about asking the dog to interact with us or teaching the dog to interact with us, even though we kind of look at people whose dogs walk perfectly with a kind of like idolization, if you like. So I'm going to talk a lot about the brain, and I'm going to use this phrase cognitive load. So basically cognitive load is where you're doing different tasks. It's about multitasking. And cognitive load is where we're doing something that's complicated on top of other things that we're supposed to be doing. And what happens is the brain just fails. It's impossible. The harder the cognitive load, the more the brain has to do. So the harder the task, the more the brain has to do. And we think that loose lead walking is easy, but along with recall, it's my opinion, really is my opinion. I don't know how other dog trainers feel about this, but it's those two things are the hardest things to achieve. Like everything in the house is perfect. Those dogs are like Hester's upside down on the couch, Lydia's right next to me. They're not barking at things, not going crazy. Those things were easily solved, easily resolved. They sit for a biscuit, it's all nice, they don't, they're not chewing, I can go out, I can leave them and whatever, it's all fine. Those things were acceptable, and we got to that point, but it was just going out of the house for every single minute out of the house was just horrible. So it is a really big cognitive load because we've made the environment really exciting, and then we're asking the dog to do something really hard, which is walk, because it's not the dog's natural kind of pace. Dogs can walk, and I'm going to be talking quite a lot about that, but it's not the dog's natural pace. The dog's kind of natural pace might be, depending on the dog, might be to kind of like, some of them pace, don't they? So some of them trot, and if you watch wolves, I love watching wolves, they kind of do that pacing as well when they're going through an environment that's got nothing in it for them. So Heston, when he's like just off the lead, if there's nothing interesting in the environment, he's just trotting. But where there's lots of other things, then we're really competing with the environment, and that's where the cognitive load becomes hard. So thinking of my little Cocker Spaniel, who most of the time was absolutely fine, her recall was nice, she walked nicely on the lead, she didn't pull like a maniac. But it was hard when there were things in the environment that put a lot of pressure on her. So one of those things was cow pats, that she liked to eat and roll in cow pats, sometimes simultaneously. And so the cognitive load of responding to my recall at that point, 0. It was so we sometimes use words like stubborn for these kinds of, they're just really stubborn, they won't do it, or they're not, or they're naughty, or they sometimes we use horrible words like dominant, which are not at all. Tilly was the opposite of a dominant dog, and so then we start thinking bad stuff about our dog simply because they can't handle what it is we've asked them to do, and I'll talk about that too. And then, why can't your dog walk on the lead? Well, have you got the right breed to walk nicely on the lead? Because there are breeds who win obedience competitions and there are breeds who don't. Because it's easier to teach dogs who are designed and have had, 3,000 years of working alongside us, like shepherd dogs. Hunting dogs and farming dogs generally tend to be. So any kind of mainland European shepherd, any kind of New World shepherd, herding dog like the collies and the Aussies, they're designed to work with a human being. They're designed for that interface with us. And also gun dogs, so your spaniels, your labradors, these dogs are designed to work with us. There's a reason there are not very many terriers as kind of assistance dogs, because it's really hard to get them to be that focused for that amount of time. And even breeds like Labradors and Golden Retrievers that we might use for, guide dog assistance and so on, come from very special lines where those qualities have been bred into them so that they're not that engaged in the environment as, say, for instance, your average terrier might be. Terriers are all right. I love terriers. They're just like, whatever, I'm just going to do what I want to do. Because terriers were designed to be independent. They were not designed to work with us. You wanted your terrier to go down a hole and find a creature that you didn't want living on your land. And so that's what you had a terrier to do, was to be independent and to do its own thing. So it can be very hard to get your terrier to check in with you and to walk on a lead. But the good thing about terriers is they're fairly small. So if you've got a good pace, you can keep up with that trot that your terrier might be doing. On the other hand, we've got also breeds like sight hounds who were bred to run for very short periods of time. Your Salukis, your Afghans, your greyhounds, your Podencos and Galgos and so on. And then we've got our scent hounds, which of course in France we're absolutely loaded with scent hounds. Now, contrary to popular belief, scent hounds don't need a lot of exercise. If you go and watch the scent hounds that are in kind of like an enclosure, the working scent hounds, they're not spinning like we might find some like German Shepherds tend to spin and Bull Terriers and so on. They're not spinning in the kennels because they've been called those kind of dogs that can't cope with long periods of inactivity, just like the greyhounds and levriers have been kind of called out of the field, if you like, many years ago. And it would be unuseful to have a dog who couldn't cope in a kennelled environment for 6 months of the year. So we know in the hunting period now, and if you've got a hunting dog that can't cope with that downtime, then it's not a particularly efficient hunting dog. And we still live in a working community where these things are important. So, you know, these dogs that can't cope with that period of downtime and that period of relaxation tend not to be the ones who get through, if you like, the genetic selection that we've imposed upon them. So scent hounds are also, they're not like Heston enjoys running across open field and like sight hounds would enjoy running across open field. Scent hounds, it's very much about the scent. So they're bred to track, they're bred to stick the nose to the ground and to follow the smell of it, and even their ears are designed to waft up the scent as they're moving their head across it. So they're not designed for, yes, they're designed for endurance, and you'll see them and they'll be out and they'll be working most of the day, but they're also designed to have downtime. However, they're designed to have a singular focus and actually work with the pack, with the group. So that's why they do a lot of the yodeling. It's like, I can't find a scent, lads, when you've got a dog who yodels, and the baying that we might find for beagles and the big Anglo-Francais hounds. So if you are struggling to understand why your dog can't walk on the lead and you don't really know the breed very well, it's a really cheap book, which is just, you know, offensive. It should be worth £1,000, this book. It's called Meet Your Dog by Kim Brophy, and it's great. And it just explains a little bit about the genetic background. So if you want a dog who's going to walk to heel perfectly, and they're going to give you that, what I call the stargazer. So the stargazer is that, you know, the German Shepherd at the side that walks like this at their owner, I love you, I love you, I love you, and you couldn't get a cigarette paper between them. If you want that kind of dog, get yourself a gun dog or a shepherd, preferably not from working lines because you're going to find that a bit more of a struggle, and train them from the puppy. And do nothing else from sort of that 8-week period right through to 12 weeks about reinforcing how valuable it is to be in your presence, and then don't let them off the lead for 18 months. That way, then you'll not ever have that kind of competition with the environment, because they'll never learn how fun it is out there, and they'll just be the obedient little dog trotting alongside you. So it's very much about the breed. And then I will also say that, you know, there's certain things that make a lot of sense when you know the breed. So if you follow Smart Pup, she's great. She's a woman I know from way back, Jane, and she's talking about her working spaniels. And she's talking about spaniels kind of doing the zigzag, because that's what they're designed to do. It's called quartering, which is going backwards and forwards across a scent line to get closer and closer to the scent. So and it just reminded me when she said that of my granddad trying to walk our family American Cocker when I was very young, and that dog was just a maniac, especially for old chip wrappers that had been left outside the chip shop on a Saturday night. So Sunday morning was really tough, because spaniels are also food oriented. So there are things that you need to understand about your breed that will make it more complicated, maybe. But then also, breed is not an excuse for, having a dog that you're just going to go, oh, well, I'm just going to let you off lead because I can't walk you on lead. Because my theory of this is, I've got Liddy who I'm never going to let Liddy off the lead. She's got that high prey drive. It'll take me until she's 97 to get to the point where I could safely let her off the lead around animals. Heston, fine, I could let him off the lead around cows and so on. You know, there's plenty of places that I can take him. But having a lead actually means that I can, when I've got a dog who walks nicely on lead, means I can do all kinds of other stuff with them that I can't do in other times and places. So it's quite useful to be able to have them be able to have that loose lead and be able to walk them on lead, because then you can do all the fun stuff like taking them to places that you can't go where your dog's off lead, or where there are a lot of animals that they might chase. You know, I go very often, probably every other day, to the large forest that's near me, and I don't let my dogs off lead, partly because number one, it's against the law, and partly number two, because it's stressful for the animals that are there, and partly number three, because I would lose them. So I wouldn't be able to access that place if I didn't take my dogs on the lead. So having a dog who can walk nicely on the lead is important, and that's why we should never say, oh, I've got huskies, so there's no point even trying. I've got a hound, there's no point even trying. I've got a terrier, there's no point even trying. Or I've got an adult dog that came from the shelter, there's no point trying, because all dogs can learn. And Heston and Lydia are perfect examples of dogs who were wrecked. They were ruined. They pulled like beasts on the lead. And I have to say, I think it must have been just before the second lockdown, it was just after Flicker had died. I then started taking Heston and Lydia out together, which I'd never done before. And oh my God, I thought my arms were going to come out of my sockets, because we were both encouraging each other to pull. And so that must have been last September, October. And I was like, it was just exhausting. And we had to, I just didn't know how I was going to cope. I really didn't. I thought you could put roller skates on me and I would end up in Belgium. It was crazy. So that progress that we've made in 6 months, and you'll see some video, is actually it's important progress for you to know that this can happen with dogs who've got a very long period of pulling, and you know, whatever the breed is, it's not an excuse. So next one is the dog's brain. Why is it so hard? And let me talk a little bit about this cognitive load. Okay, so this is the dog's brain. The tail kind of bit at the back, at the right hand side, is the brain stem, and that leads up into what I call the dog brain. It has other names, and no one's agreed what that name is, but you might hear it called the limbic system or the diencephalon, and all kinds of other names that people have given it, and nobody can agree exactly where it begins and it ends. But what it is, it's the dog's operating system. It's a baseline software that it came pre-installed with. And it's big. It looks fairly small there, but it has a lot of control over the brain. Okay, so it's the dog's dog brain, and it wants to do all the dog stuff that the dog wants to do, like smell stuff, run, but trot, rather than walking nicely to heel. It's all of the stuff that you don't have to teach the dog to do, like go and find things to roll in if you tilly, or eat cow pats, or whatever it is. And that has it's what we call white matter. And what that means is it's kind of like the brain's fiber optic. The white is actually kind of like a jelly almost. It's an insulating jelly that makes the neurons within that jelly much more capable of transmitting information very, very quickly, which is why I call it fiber optic. So that kind of information that's saying do dog stuff is very, very quick. And then the stuff on the outside we kind of know is the cortex. It's the developed brain. It's not quite as developed as a human being's. And then I'm going to have to say at this point, we have, you know, without comparison, the most, what we would call the grey matter, the exterior bits, and we don't have very good self-control. You know, how many people, I've already seen 5 comments from people on Facebook that really thought, what possessed you to make that comment? You know, could you not just sit on your hands and let it go? And I'm looking and thinking, oh, you know, I'm creeping middle age, finding it really, really difficult to lose weight. Why is that? My grey matter, the sensible bit of my brain is going, just don't eat the chocolate, Emma. Don't buy the chocolate. Don't eat the chocolate. Leave the chocolate in the fridge. You know, enjoy it when you've done a little bit of this, or you know, it's logical, it's sensible, it's the adult brain, it's the rational brain. We've got a lot of it, and we're not very good at managing our own selves and our own behaviour, hence why I'm not a size 8 anymore, and why our dogs pull on the lead. So I like to kind of think of the brain as like one of those dual operating cars, where you've got the teenager who wants to be boy racer, and thinks they know it all, and they're very impulsive, and they haven't learned because that part of their brain doesn't come online until their mid-20s. If you're ever wondering why you've had such a hard time with your teenagers, they haven't learned that kind of self-control yet, and they're in the driving seat. And then on the other side, you've got the sensible adult, the driving instructor, who's then going, okay, mirror, signal, maneuver, hands at 10 to 2, and they're the ones who can step in if something, it all goes to pot. In actual fact, it's probably the other way around. The teenage brain is the one who's doing all the commanding. And because it's faster, it's quicker, it's literally in the driving seat. And you've got then on the flip side of that, you've got then this rational adult grey matter, the outside of the brain, trying to take control over it when it's at its very, very worst. When did my mother try and step in with me when I was a teenager? When I was doing the bad stuff, when I was already way down that line. And it's the same with our dogs. So if you think of it as the centre kind of the kind of the grey blobs in the centre and the brainstem, that kind of tail bit. If you think of that as kind of like the dog's driving brain, the dog brain, the brain that wants to do all the dog stuff, and then their neocortex, their grey matter over the top, is slower. Grey matter is less efficient at sending information than white matter, and it's also the kind of the rational. It's what we call executive function, and it fails under stress. It fails under cognitive load. So that's when we default to doing dog stuff. Well, dogs default to doing dog stuff, and humans default to eating chocolate out the fridge when they know that they need to lose some weight. So we've got these kind of competing things, all of us, and the more animal we are, the more that's going to be a competition for us. So we've also got this competition between the involuntary things that we know already how to do, the stuff we're born knowing how to do, like smell stuff and roll in things. Nobody has to teach a dog how to dip its shoulder into a nice smell and roll in it, and they all do it in exactly the same way. That kind of stuff is hardwired. They're born with it. And what goes over the top of that, the grey matter over the top of that, is what we teach the dog in their lifetime. And that is the stuff that fails. So if you think about it, dogs are not born knowing how to walk on the lead, and that's why that fails when you're asking them to do a lot of things. So I'm going to ask you to think of it a bit like a computer game, one of those, kind of like Mortal Kombat kind of things, where each level gets progressively harder and you're going to have to fight at each level a new kind of more tough kind of competitor. So, you start those Mortal Kombat kind of games with the easy ones at the beginning, and when you've mastered those, they're such a blast, they're so easy, then you move on to the next one. And what we've got is the final boss level, haven't we? Where you've got that kind of, the most talented, the most efficient, the most capable, the biggest, most powerful, the final boss that you have to defeat in order to win the game. And for a lot of us, we're taking our dogs out in the final boss level when you haven't actually mastered even how to use the control set yet. So I'm going to talk quite a lot about how we need to take it back a bit, and we need to dial it back a bit and do easier stuff before taking our dogs out into the wild environment. And I'll talk to you about some of the ways that we can manage that so that it makes it a lot easier for us. Okay, so we need 3 things in place first. One of them is impulse control. If your dog doesn't have impulse control, by which I mean they know how to wait, they know how to stop, they know how to be still, they know how to, take control of themselves, they know how to switch dog brain into the interface with the human brain. So they know how to go from sniffing, when you say stop or no, come here or let's go or whatever it is you say, that your dogs can do that because they can switch then into the things they've been taught in this lifestyle, like don't eat the cow pat, then that's impulse control. So impulse control is don't do the thing you want to do, essentially. So we have this thing called the marshmallow test that we use with children, and dogs would fail. Most dogs would fail. In fact, actually, a lot of dogs would pass, which makes them just even more special. So children fail this up to, around the age of 5. So what you do is you take a small child and you put them in a room with a marshmallow and you say, if you don't eat that marshmallow and I go out of the room, you can have 2 marshmallows when I come back. So it's about delayed gratification. And we'd have dogs who would fail. Tilly would be that dog who would wait until I got out of the room, eat the marshmallow, and then sit there going, "But I didn't eat it. Where's my other marshmallow? You said there would be another marshmallow." Um, and then I've also had dogs like Molly. Molly would have sat and she would have looked and she would have dribbled and she would have waited. So some dogs have got impulse control. So if I'd have said, and we did this, just by accident, you've left your plate out, your dinner plate on the table. Molly was the kind of dog I could do that with. In fact, that was one of the saddest things with Heston when he started his medication for epilepsy, was that he lost his impulse control over food. So before, I'd had a dog who didn't counter surf and would have left my human food, because human food was no interest to him. And when he started taking phenobarbital, then my dad said he's just eating my ham sandwich, and Heston had never done that, not in 7 years. So the marshmallow test is an example of how we fail as humans right up until a certain point. And then gradually around 6, 7, 8 years old, it starts to come online sometimes. And they've got all kinds of longitudinal studies about these, which are really fascinating, about how people who can delay gratification actually, go on to more productive lives. It's very interesting. But I think the same thing is true for dogs, that those of them who can't control their impulse to do something, their dog brain, if they're kind of like, I need a better phrase, don't I, for they're I don't want to say they're human brain, but it kind of is. It's the things that we want to do them to do as humans. They're grey matter. If their grey matter can't take control over their dog brain, then you haven't got a chance in hell of getting them to walk on a loose lead. You haven't. You really haven't. And I used to say with Heston, it was like taking Charlie Sheen through a cocaine factory. It really was. Taking him out on a walk was literally like taking a dog to the place where the most addictive things that they could ever want to do were present in such high volumes that he just couldn't cope. He had no chance of having any impulse control. So this is where, because the other thing is, this bit inside the dog brain, it doesn't have very good voluntary control over anything. It's this bit, the grey matter, that has the voluntary control. So you need dogs to be able to control themselves and to control the dog brain. So there's a post on Wolf Likes Me called Teaching Parameters, which will go some way to helping you do these things. And I do them with Liddy and with Heston all the time. We start in the house, and I'll talk you through this process. And then, eventually, I ask them to do it at final boss level. So the other week we went to you get to know, when you've got dogs who pull forward smells, you get to know where the pockets are, don't you? So one of the pockets always are crossroads at the bottom of hills, because you get the scent kind of pools down at the bottom if there's not been a strong wind, and if there's a long corridor kind of running up, then the scent will kind of pool of all the animals, all the creatures, all the dogs. And one of the videos I'm going to show, in fact it's not a video, but it is on my YouTube, it's the picture from the very first clip. I took that picture in a place where there'd just been, within the last 20 minutes, 40 excited dogs run through on a canicross. And it's also filled with game, it's at the bottom. It was the toughest. That was their final boss level. And Liddy wasn't all there. You can see that she's not all there, but she was trying her best. And so teaching parameters is really important. But what I mean by that is teaching a dog to wait. So for me, wait means you will be able to get it in a minute. So we do this, don't we, with bowls and things like that. And I also teach them to leave it. So wait means you'll be able to get the thing that you want. Leave it means you'll never get that thing. That thing is not for you, but I have got other things that are nice. So those two things are important skills. I also teach them get it. Because another thing that Jane says is we spend all our lives, I could literally be on a walk going, leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it, no, leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it. It's much better to go and say, get it, for the one thing that you actually want them to be able to get. Or, as I say, go sniff. So when I'm coming up to those places where I know my dog's going to really struggle, the final boss level, I'm going to say, go sniff. And they have got absolute freedom to go where they want. I don't let them off the lead, but I use long lines and you'll see videos of where I'm doing this, to say, go get it, go have a sniff, go do your dog stuff, get it out of your system. And so that's what I mean by teaching parameters. It's really important that your dog knows these skills. And if your dog can't do this in the house, then you haven't got a chance in hell of being able to do it in your final boss level, where you're competing with every single smell and sight and thing that has ever existed. So that post on Wolf Like to Meet, which I'll post in the links, is I think one of the vital skills about teaching your dog to walk on the lead. One of those things is slow treats, and you'll see a link to that. So slow treats is just about, can you stop yourself grabbing? And dogs do start being more grabby when they're aroused. It comes back to that cognitive load. When they're asked to do something hard in a hard environment, asking them to do something, another thing, is really quite a challenge. So slow treats, you can start near the dog's nose, and if the dog doesn't move towards you, which way is my hand going, you say yes and give them the treat. And the next time you start a little bit higher and you move it down and you let it go. And the same, and you can do it really, really slowly. So for me, at final boss level is where I can do slow treats in the forest. So I can say to Liddy, okay, wait, and go down for 30 seconds while she sits there without moving. Because if she moves, it goes back again and it goes away. And at that point, if you're in a really competing environment, they'll just go, okay, then I'll go and smell this. It's more fun. So it's really, really hard. And to see her doing this is just genius. It's such control, but she's a shepherd and I expect it of her. So I'm going to say you need to be able to do these things in your home. If you can't do them there and in your garden and in places that are not hard, and we'll talk about those environments as well, you haven't got a chance in hell of doing it in the places where your dog really struggles. And as I said, get it and leave it are two really, really vital skills, so that my dogs know, okay, that's fine. I can go and that I'm supposed to get that. I'm supposed to be able to sniff that. And leave it means no, that's not for me. It's, other things will happen that are better. Okay, so another thing they need to be able to do is focus. So I said at the beginning, a lot of us kind of take our dogs out because it's our dog's time. And we know in a 24-hour day, if we take our dog out for an hour, 2 hours, it's still a very short amount of time. And I think for some of us, we don't like asking our dogs to, do that kind of stargazer walk and practice heel walking and do that kind of stuff. It's their time. But you do need a dog who can focus on you. Again, if they can't do this in the home, they're never going to be able to do this when you're out on the streets. So there are things that you can do. And Leslie McDevitt's pattern games are amazing from Control Unleashed. And they're very simple. So one of them is the up-down game. Basically, and you start this in your house, you drop a treat on the floor, the dog eats it, and when the dog looks up at you like, hello, treat dispenser, where's my next one? You say yes and drop another. So what it's doing is it's teaching them to look up at you, and that when they look up at you, good stuff will happen. So I just love the up-down game. It's so simple. All they've got to do is lift their head up. And the up-down game, by the way, can be a really good way to avoid those things happening in the environment that would cause your dog to pull or to not have good recall. So, for instance, I saw 2 deer the other day. Heston and Liddy did not see the 2 deer. The 2 deer stood in the centre alley for about, in my time, about 500 years looking at us. And I was like, I can't walk up there. If I'm going to walk up there, both dogs are going to pull me over into the bushes. So what I did is I turned them around. We did a let's go, which is a really important skill. And we stood and I played the up-down game with them. And, and so all they were just doing is looking at me, looking at the floor, looking at me, looking at the floor, looking at me, looking at the floor. And the deer eventually, after the 500 years, went on their way. And we could take a bit of time to do other things. 1, 2, 3 treat is another one that I use, and I use this when Liddy gets a little bit fizzy. And what I mean by that is she gets her behaviour is a little bit more exuberant than usual, and this is where she's going to struggle to walk on lead. And this often happens at the beginning of walks, and also she can manage by the end of the walk, and it's not because she's tired out. It's just because her dog brain isn't, a grey matter has got a little bit of control over her dog brain. And at the beginning of the walk, the dog brain is in charge. So 1, 2, 3 treat is just a very, very simple thing. All they have to do is just walk near me. And I say 1, 2, 3, drop. And a treat goes on the floor. And you'll see me playing these games shortly. And it's just a really simple thing. So if your dog can't even do the simplest of the things that they really enjoy, I'm not talking about sit and things like that involve quite a lot of impulse control. Up-down game is just literally doing that. That's all it is. And 1, 2, 3 treat is just walking. Ping pong get it is another one that's really simple. So what you do is you've got 5 treats in each hand, and you toss your left hand to the right and your right hand to the left when the dog comes back to you. So you start with 1, you throw it and you say, get it, and you throw it about a metre away. And then with your other hand, you throw the other direction and you say, get it, but you do it when the dog comes back to you. So when the dog goes to get the first treat, soon as they turn to orient back to you, you throw it the other way. So these focus games are really getting you to be interesting in ways that are not complex. You know, this is not where I'm asking Lydia to pick the ace of spades out of a deck of cards. This is where I'm asking her to do something simple like look at me. So when I say reward eye contact, that can be really vital. So one of my favourite trainers is Kathy Sadeo, who's an American trainer, and she's got a thing called SMART times 50. So SMART means see, mark and reward, I think. Treat, maybe. I can't remember what all the letters are. But basically, at the beginning of the day, you take 50 very small treats. I use, Lydia's favourite treats, and we'll talk a little bit about that too, about how you know what their favourite treats are. And you just reward what you like. So instead of going, oh, my dog pulls all the time, every time they don't pull, you give him a biscuit. And eventually get to the point, and this is what Hagrid did with me, and I'll talk about Hagrid shortly. But you can use this for eye contact. So some of my walks, I will use Lydia's 50 treats. I'm stingy. I don't use 50. I use 20. But every time she looks at me, I give her a biscuit. And more and more looking at me. So more and more times she's kind of looking at me. And the best thing about this is eventually you only need to reward the best. So if she only looks at me a little bit, or she's quite far ahead of me and she's still pulling and she looks around like, am I doing okay? That's not good enough. She's got to be back here and looking at me. So you can then, once you've rewarded 100%, for say 30, 40 times, only reward the very, very best of what you like to see. And you'll get more and more of that. So we'll talk about that shaping afterwards. But some walks, if she looks at me, I give her a biscuit. Other walks, if she walks slow, I give her a biscuit. And that kind of SMART 50, where you just see what you like, say yes when you see it, give them a treat. That's just absolutely, the easiest thing to do when you're on a walk is just when you see it, imagine your brain like a camera. You're going to capture that one moment where they're doing something, right and not being a maniac, and give them something rewarding for doing that. So those are really simple ways to get focus. And you've also, a third thing that you need to do with your dogs before you even start doing lead walking is helping them cope with frustration. Because if you've got a dog who can't wait, who's barking at you, who's pulling on the lead, who's trying to move on, who's like, come on, please, and tormented and spinning in circles or whatever, Liddy spins. Heston just kind of sits there looking at me like, please can we move? Because he knows how to cope with frustration. What do you do when nothing is happening? You sit and wait, and good things will happen. So you do need a dog who can cope with that and not get very frustrated with it, because often frustration will lead to aggression. So some of the things that I like here are a dog who can settle in public, like just to be able to sit and, sometimes I just go out on Sunday. It was so lovely on Sunday. The dogs were sniffing stuff. They were both on a 10-metre lead. There was nothing coming. We were in the middle of nowhere. I could see for miles. I just lay on my back and looked at the sky. It was lovely. And I just lay there for about 5 minutes. And eventually the dogs came back to me and they were like, hello, what are you doing down there? And that kind of... that was me settling in public, by the way. That was not them. But I'll do moments where I'll do the same for them. I'm looking at a thing. I expect you to be still. So I do a lot of photography when I'm walking, and sometimes I will want to get my tripod out or, mess around with stuff. I've got I want to take, nice photos, and my dogs are attached to me. So I expect them to be able to settle while I'm doing that, faffing about for 5 minutes. So that they're not pulling on the lead, just like I did when I lay down in a field and waited for them when they were sniffing stuff. So in Steve Mann's book, Easy Peasy Doggy Squeezy, there's something called the rucksack walk. So basically you take your rucksack with you. You go to a place that's fairly calm, and you've got 3 or 4 things in your rucksack. So you've got nice things to eat, something to chew, some kind of toy to investigate, something for them to investigate. There are better instructions than mine, but a rucksack walk, you just go and you sit. It's like a picnic with a dog, with some stuff in a rucksack. And Suzanne Clothier talks also about getting your deck chair out. So if your dogs are being maniacs at the beginning of your walk and you're really excited, well, it's not, there's no way on earth that they're ever going to be able to walk on a loose lead. And so I get my deck chair out, we sit down and we kind of like, okay, take it in, drink it in, wait until we're ready to go. So you can see why a dog would need to be able to cope with frustration, because otherwise that's just going to wind them up. So if you feel that your dog, you need to let them get it out of their system first before you can do anything with them, well, that's fine, but you might be better working on them about frustration before you start then trying to teach them to do something that's super hard. And if you've got a hound or a gun dog, or any other kind of dog, Jane Arden's Mission Control is a great book. I mean, it's just such a genius book, that will take you through really simply how to do these things and how to get your dog under control. And a lot of her games are about those 3 things I've just talked about: impulse control, focusing on the handler, and dealing with frustration. Okay, so now we get into something else that's really important, which is eating in public. Because a lot of dogs, people say, and somebody said last night on the thread, oh, my dog just won't eat in public. Have you got anything else we can use? Your dog is going to need to eat in public. And that's, it is really important. But remember, it's a habit and it's also a behaviour. So remember those days. I'm old enough to remember the days when it was rude to eat on the streets. I'm that old. Like if you were eating on the street, you were some kind of like inferior being, I mean, we were working class with aspirations, so that's where that comes from. My grandmother didn't, if you didn't have a serviette with you or a napkin or some other kind of thing, then it wasn't for eating. And you certainly didn't eat like snacks on the streets. That was like, how common were you? So I remember those times where actually, for my grandparents, to eat on the streets was like a really naughty habit to break, a thing to do. And it was, and you see it with French people. French people just don't eat sandwiches on the street like British people do. They're not wandering around dropping crumbs everywhere, and eating in the street. Just watch them. If they go into McDonald's, they sit down and they eat and they come out. They're not eating the burger on the run. And so these things are a cultural habit for us, let alone for our dogs. I remember my nana having a cutlery and Wimpy's and cutting up burgers, and people who are using knives and forks on pizzas and won't eat with their fingers and things like this. Eating is a habit, and how we eat and when we eat are habits, and it's the same for your dog. So if you only ever feed your dog from a bowl at, 1 time in the day or 2 times in a day, then that's what your dog expects. So you've got to do a little bit of work with that. And that means, my dogs are always ready to eat. I was thinking last night when this failed and I did my first version, why? Oh, I'd gone to make myself a snack. I was feeling snackish, which I never feel snackish at like 10 o'clock at night. No impulse control. The grey matter was not in control over the white matter inside. So I decided at 10 o'clock last night that I was going to have a peanut butter wrap with some compote inside. It was just a disgusting, unhealthy snack. But Heston heard the fridge open. And I don't normally open the fridge at that time of the night. So he came kind of trotting through and I thought, oh, what the hell, I'll give you something to eat. Liddy, who's normally like, right there, I'm a shepherd, I'm doing it. She was like asleep. So I took her in a small morsel because I thought it's not fair to give Heston something and not her. And she's lying there going like, what are you doing? Why are we eating now? And there just wasn't that same thing. Now, the other thing, and you might have noticed before, my phone rang with the alarm to give the dogs their tablets. My dogs know that when that sound goes, it's time to eat, so it's very much about a habit. It's about behaviour. So you need to break that habit. You will need to break that habit in the home of eating at particular set times. Now, a lot of dogs find it stressful not to eat at set times and not to eat from a bowl. So what I do with mine is we have normal meal times. So normally that's 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. And we have a small amount in our bowl and we have a Kong and we have snakes and we have other things, and that's fine, because that reduces the frustration of when will we eat, because it's disturbing to not know when you're going to eat. If you've got relatives who've been in care homes, the hardest thing is when they don't have that schedule and they don't know when they're going to eat, and it's upsetting not to know when you're going to eat, and it's hard when your food is at the mercy of somebody else who's controlling it. So that can be a bit distressing for a dog. So I do give my dog a small amount in a bowl, and a small amount in some kind of... Now, the food toys as well are really useful for teaching dogs to cope with frustration. You can't get the thing out straight away. A dog who can spend 2 hours, like Tilly did, trying to get one treat out of a nose-it toy, a very noisy toy, 2 hours. That is a dog who can cope very, very well with frustration. A dog who can't cope with frustration is the one who leaves the Kong because he can't get a treat out because it's a bit stuck. They give up easily. So food toys can be a really nice way of teaching your dog to cope with frustration, to also control their impulses a little bit and to deal with it. Not so good at teaching them to focus on you, of course. So start to branch out and give your dog a bit more enrichment with their food, and to give your dog food at peculiar times, and to use some of that food for training in the home. Because if you can't do that, you're going to really struggle when you get outside. So there's something else as well that's called free work, which is Sarah Fisher's company, Ace Connections. And free work is basically just set up a room, different kind of surfaces in there. So you might put a few mats in there, bath mats, and different heights of things. So you might put like a potty chair in there, or a toilet, for toddlers. And I'm trying to think what else I use. I use them as my step aerobics thing. That's all that's good for these days. And other, a little ball pool. So I've got a bucket that's got plastic balls in there. Put treats in there. You can put hard treats in there, soft treats, easy things, treats that'll take them a long time to eat, things that are easy. And you station it across the whole room, and you let the dog off the lead. So I just set up my kitchen, and I separate the dogs so that Heston will be doing it outside and Lydia will be doing it inside. And free work is basically, it allows you to see what the dog's preferences are, which are the ones they enjoy, what do they eat first, what do they enjoy doing, what kind of treats do they savour? What do they eat first? Where do they go first? And it allows you to kind of build up an understanding of what your dog actually likes. And I have to say at this point, we need to step away from thinking that there's food designed for humans and food designed for dogs. A lot of the food that in France that's designed for humans, or certain humans, because I don't eat it, it's disgusting to me. Tripe, brains, all of these kind of things. Maybe that's going to be what your dog really, really likes. So experiment and give them some of those things that French people really love to eat, and some of us are a bit peculiar about eating, and see what they like, and stop thinking of things as being biscuits. So I've seen people trying to train the dogs, so they take them to the final boss level, and then they're trying to do loosely walking exercises with them with a biscuit. It's like if I went into something and somebody gave me a rich tea, I'm like, what is this? I'm not working for a rich tea biscuit. I might be a bit more interested, give me a cream cake. So those kind of things are really important to understand what our dogs should like, so that when we start, and we're not going to start at the final boss level, but when we start working with our dogs outside, what we want is them to have habits. So when I say touch to Liddy, when touch means you touch my hand with your nose and you get a treat, and it's a really straightforward, simple move for her to do. But I know if I ask her to do touch outside and she can't, or she ignores me, it means that her dog brain is in control and not the grey matter. And that's not because she's stubborn, it's not because she's disobedient, it's not because I'm a bad teacher, it's not because I'm naughty, it's just because her dog brain is in charge over the grey matter. So that's really important to know. But there are times when it becomes, what happens is we can't, when we are learning things, eventually it pushes it down into automatic behaviours. So coming back to the boy racer, Well, he's not going to be learning to drive forever. I don't get in my car and go mirror, signal, maneuver every single time. I don't. We learn fluency, and dogs learn fluency as well, and that goes with eating in public and doing behaviours in public and focus games in public as well. So we need to get it to the point where it's just automatic. So when I say, I don't even have to be, I don't have to even think, look in the mirror before you indicate anymore. And point in case, French people and their indication's not always the best, is it? And I have been told by French people, why were you indicating there? Like, because I was turning. What? Why would you? It's like indicator bulbs must have been on, I don't know, some kind of, must have been very hard to get hold of. So we've got these kind of cultural habits of things that we just do that are instinct, like indicating or looking in a mirror or blah, blah. They're the same for the dogs. And we want them to be able to have that on instinct. So when I say touch, it's almost automatic for Liddy. That she'll just do it no matter what else is going on in the environment. But there are times even then when it's just too hard for them to do. So free work helps you understand what your dog's like, and you'll find lots of videos on YouTube. You'll find Sarah Fisher's Ace Connections group, and it just helps you explore what it is your dog enjoys doing. Do they like the chewing? Do they like the licking? Do they like things that go very quickly? And I think another thing that's really important is when we're trying to build up eating habits, is not to do it the wrong way round. Okay, so if you are dog stuff is always going to be more fun than eating, but remember, a lot of what dogs are doing outside is part of what we call the predatory motor sequence. So they want to look at things, chase things, smell things. It's all about finding things to eat. So eating is part of what they would naturally do. But when we've been breeding dogs, we've cut out the kind of the tail end of that pattern, if you like. So terriers are very good at this. So they have the full stretch. So they go from, smelling stuff and seeing stuff to chasing stuff to catching stuff to killing stuff to consuming stuff. So you shouldn't really have a problem with a terrier because they've got the whole works. If you've got a livestock guardian dog, they've got none of that. So you might have to do a bit of work, but probably if you've got a livestock guardian dog, they're not going to be pulling on the lead because they're not interested in the environment. They're interested in being with you. So that's what I was saying about breed. It's interesting to know these things. So for all of our dogs, what they're doing outside is part of this kind of pseudo eating it was how they find stuff anyway. So when my nana's and my granddad's dog was pulling on walks, he was actually pulling to get to the chip wrappers. So if my granddad had a handful of treats in his pocket, like he had a handful of treats for himself, then actually the dog probably wouldn't have pulled as much because he's getting what he needs from his human being. So this can be, yes, big stretch. This was obviously boring her. Oh, really boring her. Thanks, Liddy, yawning. So, eating is part of what they should be able to do outside. But we need to remember it is a behaviour. And if we are, so we can do it two ways. So we can either let them do the dog stuff and then eat. So just giving them a small handful of treats when you get back to the car and everything's calmed down. Or sitting in your deck chair until they're ready to eat. So it depends on whether you've got a stressed dog, because stress also will affect things. If you've got a dog who's stressed, so they're over-aroused by the environment, but they're also a bit frightened of what's in there, or they're a bit territorial, because we've not talked about those two maybe things as well to be noticing, why your dog is pulling. We've not really talked about the why very much, but one of the reasons Liddy will pull is if another dog has urinated somewhere and she has to urinate on top of it. So there's a little bit of something that may be territorial in there as well, like this is my spot, and she does a lot at the beginning of her walks where she feels a little bit less comfortable, and she will pull towards a place in order to urinate on it. So she's, at that moment, she's too aroused and she'll often refuse food. And what I need to do there is just do some kind of sitting in the jet chair, or the other thing that I've done with her is just stick her in the car and we drive maybe 10 places and we sit and we do nothing. And we drive another place, we sit, we do nothing. We drive another place, we sit, we do nothing. So that it takes the sting out of that getting out of the car and being over aroused in the first place. So sometimes I will want to see that they can eat before we go on. and we're using the dog stuff, the moving forward, as a, kind of a reward for having eaten. So it's kind of like reverse in a way. But we do this kind of like presenting things on a plate. Our hand is a plate. So where we're presenting the food to the dog on a plate, on our hand, then we're missing a trick. So we can make the food work like prey moves. So for instance, if you've got a visual dog like a mainland European Shepherd, a herding dog like a collie, a dog like a greyhound, a livery, Podenco, Galgo, whatever, they're very visual dogs, and their eyes are designed differently from other dogs. So make it visual. Throw the treat so that they can see, track it, and moving. Pounce on it. If you've got a dog who is very olfactory, like many of the scent hounds are, then hide the food and let them find it. So one of the best things that you can do there is kind of like either using snuffle mats, so transporting the snuffle mats so that you've got your dog, a scent dog, used to using its nose and finding the food in the scent mat, in the snuffle mat, which are those kind of like overgrown bath mats that you can put the treats inside, or pickpockets and things like this. There's lots and lots of things where a dog is asked to use their nose to find food, and they're not interested in the visual stuff, so they're not interested in the kind of the movement of the treat. What they're interested in is the smell of the treat. So hide the treat, make them work for it, because what they're interested in is smelling stuff and finding it. So if you are hiding something like a sausage in the grass, you can hide it, but I usually throw a small handful of things like ham, and those kind of use that ability of the food to replicate the prey. Now you can use toys, and why I would say why not use toys? You can use toys, and plenty of people use toys. So the police use toys, search and rescue people use toys. You don't, if you're doing cadaver work, you definitely don't want the dog eating food around the cadaver. So you can use toys, but you need to build up their engagement with the toy. And sometimes, if you're asking for a calm behaviour, which what loose lead is, and then you're using a toy, I think those two things are contradictory, because the toy creates arousal and you're asking for the dog to be less aroused. So I don't like using toys with dogs for loose lead, because I think it's counterproductive. I like using toys for recall, that's absolutely fine, but I'm not sure that a toy is a very useful thing in terms of helping a dog, being a reward for a dog, because I don't think it's very rewarding at that time. So a lot of it is just about that moment, about that time. And that's important. So we do need to remember that eating in public is a skill, and we need to make sure our dogs have got that skill. So I would start by giving them something unusual in the home, then a little bit of something unusual in the garden, finding food in the garden, then finding things at the end of the walk when they're less aroused. So, dropping a handful of treats when we get back in the car or when we're coming back to the home. And then, gradually spinning it out and then using it at the final boss level at the very end. Okay, so the big secret is it's not about the lead. It's about being in your space. And so I need you to imagine from this point onwards that you've got however long your lead is. So I use a 10-meter lead with Heston, and I'll talk about leads shortly. And I use a 2-meter or a 3-meter lead with Liddy, depending where we are. Sometimes, if there's absolutely nothing, I'll put her on a 10-meter lead as well. What that means is I need to imagine a great big circle around me of 10 meters, and I need my dog to be in that space. So a lot of these things are going to work for recall as well as they work for loose lead. That it means that we are in a bubble, and I need to reward you for being in that bubble with me and not going outside that bubble. And what happens is when they are in that bubble, which is hard because the dog can't imagine that bubble. And that's why we're using the lead. So the lead is about safety. It's about saying this is the end of the bubble. And what we need to make sure that the dog is doing is being rewarded for being in our space, not for walking loose on the lead. Because a dog who walks in our space, well, if they've got the right length lead, whatever space we've decided that is. So if I've decided my circle, my bubble is 2 meters, I imagine it more like a hula hoop than a bubble because I don't want the dog floating. So if I imagine that hula hoop space, and I don't want my dog going out of 2 meters of that space, I don't want them more than 2 meters away from me, then I need to make sure that they are comfortable being in that space and that being in that space is rewarding for them. So what that means is I need to decide that that hula hoop will change, if you like. So when we're in town, that hula hoop is 1 meter. When we're in a big open space and you've got a bit of room to explore and you're not trotting on the lead, then that hula hoop is 10 meters. So I'll switch leads. But what that absolutely means for the dog is that I've got to be able to reward them for being in my space. So what I mean by that is you've got to make it really, you are in competition with the environment. You really are. And you've got to be more interesting than the stuff that is beyond the hula hoop. Okay, and so that means work and it means practice. So I've got a little video, I hope, as she says, which should just be coming in now, of Liddy and I doing let's go and hand touches. I'm not sure how this is supposed to play. There we go. So we're just practicing in an environment that there's not very much going on. This is not final boss level. This is easy, super easy level, she says, when it's doing its stuff and finally coming up. And so these are things I've taught in the home. That's not a good message, is it? These are things I've taught in the home. And I always cue her by saying, "Are you ready?" And I get her on the right side of me. And we're just doing hand touches and I'm feeding her. So you see the lead is pretty loose. She's excited because she's jumping up and she never normally does that. And look at her tail. You know, she's got a great big helicopter tail. And we're practicing our let's go. There's another let's go. And what I want is, look how close she is to me there. You know, I'm really rewarding her for being in my space. And she's so excited to do it. Look at that tail. So what we had there is just a little bit of practice, and I did it at the end of the walk when she was able to do it, of practicing let's go and some hand touches. So what I'm doing now, I'm just going, do you know what? I pay out. I am a moving vending machine that pays out, and the environment, not so much. And I'm also doing it when the dog has got used to being in that environment, so she's calmed down, she's chilled out, she's actually ready to work. Okay, how do I move on to the next slide now? Too far. Okay, so in order to do Hagrid's methods, we are going to need some materials and equipment. We also need to know when to manage. So, for instance, I went to the vet with Lydia on Friday. She had 2 leads on her. I will say, you know, one of them was on a neck collar, which I don't normally use. One of them was on a harness, and she also had a muzzle on her. That's management. You know, I knew she was going to try and attack the vet because that's what she does. And I'm very sorry to my vet, and she made her jump a little bit. But, you know, no harm was done. No contact was made. Everything was managed. So there are going to be times when I'm going to have to manage my dog rather than trying to do any training with them. I can't do any training with her in the vet because she's just so afraid. She's just completely shut down. We did do some, you know, she was eating. That's what I mean about eating in public. She was eating pate from a pot in the vet while the vet did injections on her. And just 2 minutes before, she tried to attack the vet. So it is a skill to be able to eat in public, and it's a skill that we need to build on and to reinforce. So we need to know when we need to manage our dogs and when that might mean using, you know, using a shorter lead rather than using a long lead. So for instance, I use a 10-meter lead on Heston, but I'm going to say when we get to talking about leads and long lines, that's not appropriate for most dogs who are not used to being on that space, because you can build up an awful lot of steam in 10 meters. And if a dog is likely to do that, then that is not the kind of dog that you want on a long lead. So, you know, those are taught skills and we need to know when to manage them. So the heavy artillery, what I mean by that are things like shock collars and prong collars, particularly, and chokes, because we use those all the time. People use those all the time to try and get their dogs to work, to walk to heel. What happens, the problem with punishment is that you've got to, again, it comes back to that competition, and it's the same competition. It's the competition of how rewarding the environment is about punishment. But like I said, you want a dog to be able to find it rewarding to be in your space, okay, to be inside that hula hoop. If you're using punishments, it's not rewarding to be in that space, it's punishing. And so it's counterproductive to use punishers. And what happens also is we habituate to punishers, we get used to them. So after a certain amount of time, like for instance, my hips play me up at the moment, I just kind of get used to it. Do you know what I mean? I was just kind of like, oh, again. And the amount of people who actually live in a degree of pain that they've got used to, whereas if you gave that level of pain to somebody else who wasn't used to it, it would be hideous. It would be enough to stop them doing anything. But we're used to kind of working through things, aren't we? So if the reinforcement, if the reward is high enough, it'll cancel out any punisher anyway. So once, for instance, when I used to do marathons, I did a marathon when I had stress fractures and a swollen ankle, twisted ankle. I did a marathon with that. It wasn't my best time by a long stretch, but I still did it because even the punishment of that pain was not enough to cancel out the reward and the reinforcement for having done it in the first place. So, you know, it's complex when we're using punishers. And the problem is that dogs do habituate to it. So I've seen people saying, oh, my dog is perfectly trained to walk to heel, and they've got a choke collar on it. And they're yanking it every, you know, I've seen dog trainers do this who you know, say they're really good dog trainers, whatever. And I've seen them in not a final boss level, in a ring where the dog, you know, I can do this with Liddy when she's not got a lead on. If you can't, in your own working space, have your dog walking without a lead on at your side, then, And what has happened is that the dog trainer's got the choke collar on, and they're yanking it every, you know, I counted 5 times in 30 seconds, and they're going, oh, look at my dog walking to heel. Nope, that's your dog that's under control, but they're not walking to heel particularly. So choke chains also cause more arousal, and this is the problem with anything around the neck, so it's why I don't use anything around the neck. You also, with a choke chain, you can't use anything longer because the risk is huge. Like Liddy very, very occasionally will pounce on stuff. If I had a lead, even a 2 or 3 meter lead attached to her neck, the risk of her injury to her is huge. And the risk of that is going to be absolutely massive. And the same is true with head halters and equipment like that you can't use a long lead with those things. They're not designed for it. So if you're going to use a choke collar, you're only going to be able to use a 1 or a 1.5 meter lead. That's it. And you're also punishing the dog for being in your space, which is kind of wrong. And also they're getting used to it. And also it's adding to their arousal, because this is something I just cannot understand. We use strangulation, which is what it is, to create arousal. There's a whole thing on it. I'm not that kinky that I go looking for this on autoerotic asphyxiation, but there's a whole thing. Because it increases arousal. It lowers the level of oxygen in the blood and it increases arousal levels. So a choke chain, when your dog is aroused already by the environment, is counterproductive and is actually causing more arousal than being on a harness or whatever, because it's cutting off oxygen. And now I've talked to you about the dog brain and the grey matter. Well, it works on a first come first served basis, and what's first come is the dog brain. So if you're cutting off oxygen and blood, what you're doing is you're cutting off the sensible bit of the grey matter that can do all of the cognitive functioning and say, okay, hang on a minute, we need to be walking on the loose lead here. So it's counterproductive for so many reasons. And I like Heston to be on a 10 metre lead because he can go and explore things and smell things that are not, you know, in my immediate bubble. He doesn't have to be that close to me. It gives him a degree of freedom whilst being on the lead. And I can't do that if I've got him on a choke chain because they're not designed for that. Head halters work by controlling the movement of the dog's head. And stick one on a dog without habituating the dog to it, and good luck trying to stick that thing on it the next time. It's the same with a muzzle. So they're both things that the dog can get used to, but anything that a dog has to get used to, even a harness to some degree, because some dogs find those unpleasant too, is by its very nature unpleasant to the dog. So head halters work by just control the dog's movement. And they're kind of less bad than choke collars and so on. But again, you can't use them with long leads. So you can't ever have a head halter where a dog is able to go more than 2 meters, because the risk that if a dog lunged on something, leapt on a mouse in a field, would be absolutely huge, that you would cause some damage to you or to the dog if they did that. So if you're going to use head halters, which some people would, then you're going to need to habituate the dog to that over a period of time. Now, if you're going to do that, you might as well be training your dog to walk to, loose lead anyway. So you can stick a head halter on a biddable dog, and they will accept it the next time and just be a bit like, oh, what? But you can't give the dog that freedom to explore, because you can't put them on a longer lead, because if they pull on that longer lead, they're going to do an awful lot of damage to their neck. So I'm not a fan of head halters, simply because the amount of time it takes to train a dog to get used to it, so that they're not going to pull and cause themselves a lot of damage, and the consequences of having to have them on a shorter lead are counterproductive. I want them to be able to walk nicely on a 10-meter lead, and I can't do that with a head halter. I might as well train the dog from the beginning. I've talked about why Heston failed. It's because of extendable leads, because they put a constant amount of pressure on the dog, and a lot of them are 20-30 meters, and he gives absolutely zero control. I did a post on Wolf Like to Meet where I had 17 conditions if you're going to use an extendable lead, because I think maybe there's 1 or 2 circumstances in which it might be appropriate. Mostly they're not. My friend Rachel, who's a vet nurse in the UK, she posted the other week a little multi who'd gone into the road on an extendable lead. They're just not good equipment, not least because they're counterproductive to walking on a loose lead, because they're never loose. They're not loose. That's the whole point of them. And also, I see people using them with choke chains. Well, they're not designed for that, because the choke is designed to be yanked. It's not designed for a constant amount of pressure. Nobody walking a dog on a choke lead wants you to have a constant amount of pressure on the dog's neck. That's not good. So you want it for the dog to occasionally be loose. You don't want the dog pulling all the time on that. And you want to be able to give it the occasional jerk to remind them, or to, when they start pulling towards whatever. So you can't do that on an extendable lead unless you grab the extendable lead and give it a jerk and it's not powerful enough. So you can't use extendable leads and chokes. That doesn't work. Neither with head halters, because again, the head halter, it works by being able to put that pressure on it. The same with a front clip harness. In actual fact, you need to be able to put some pressure on it to be able to move the dog away, and an extendable lead does not give you that ability. Because even if you press the off or the stop spooling out, you can't grab and move it round. They're just counterproductive to every bit of equipment, other than, no, perhaps if you were going to use them with a well-fitting harness. Okay, so when I talk about making a switch, what I mean is that you may be using these dogs to control, you may be using this equipment already to control your dog, and I don't want to kind of go, because there have been times when I've had to use a neck collar as well, or even a martingale collar for certain dogs, or whatever, and I do that for lots of reasons. So sometimes the dog's a flight risk, sometimes the dog, and just like I said with Lydia, needed that little bit more control in the vet than I would normally have with her harness. Just simply because I needed that control and she doesn't have that control, so I have to have it. And sometimes we're in that position, aren't we? And we may want to. I think none of us want to hurt our dogs, do they? None of us want to harm our dogs. None of us want to choke our dogs. None of us want to put that pressure on the dog's airways. All of us understand that this is not good. But I understand that if you've got a 60 kilogram dog and the dog is going absolutely nuts, and you are 60 kilos yourself or less, and you're trying to maneuver your dog, then a head halter or even a choke chain or even a prong collar or a shock collar may be the equipment that you're using. But you don't have to just only use one if you're switching to a harness. And I do believe that harnesses, for the majority of dogs, if we're walking our dogs on a long lead, then we should be having a harness on them. Apart from, there are certain occasions, say for instance, you've got working gun dogs and so on, or you can't have a collar on your dog, whatever. So I think, and shelters as well. So there's times and places, and a harness as well for an unfamiliar dog can be, like I said, it can be just as stressful. It can be difficult. Some harnesses have only got 2 clips, so you have to pull it over the head. So there are reasons why we might not be using a harness. There's lots of reasons. But I do think for the majority of dogs, we should be considering an appropriate harness. Now, there are two or three that I use regularly. One's the T-Touch Balance harness, one is the Perfect Fit harness, and one of them is the Rough Wear harness. And the only reason I would say any of these three is because I've tried them myself with a number of dogs and they've never failed me. By which I mean they've never come loose, nothing's broken on them, and nothing, a dog's not got out of them. But it depends on how well fitting they are. So if you've got a dog who's an escape risk, the Rough Wear Webmaster is a good one because it's got 6 points of attachment, and you can also clip it to, you could use a carabiner or a bungee cord to clip it to the dog's collar as well, just in case. And if you've got a dog who is going to be a huge risk if they get off the lead, then you're very welcome to have a look at some of the other things. I think I did one about how to be safe on a walk on Woof Lights Meet. So if you look for Woof Lights Meet, how to be safe on a walk, you'll find ways to make sure that your dog never gets off the lead. But there's all this kind of myth about how harnesses teach dogs to pull. No, they don't. No, they don't. The other equipment maybe stops dogs from pulling if the environment is not that exciting already. But here's the thing, right? If the environment is not that exciting for your dog is easy to train, So if it works to use a choke or a head halter or whatever on your dog is not that interested in the environment anyway. Because I can tell you right now, there is not a piece of equipment in the world that would stop Heston or Liddy pulling. Not a piece of equipment in the world. So I've had Liddy in the choke chain and nothing else. I've not used the shock collar on her, and I've not used the prong collar on her. But I can't remember what it was. Oh, it was just a demo really. It was just because she was loosely walking already. But there isn't a piece of equipment I can use on them. There isn't a piece of equipment that I can use on them that is enough of a punisher to stop them being interested in the environment. So that's why, if you've got a dog who's already, those pieces of equipment are working with, we'll make the switch because your dog is not that interested in the environment anyway. And the hardcore pullers who don't care, there are people who just go, no, this prong did not work for me, this shock collar did not work for me. And I hate to say it, but I've seen animals who've been massively abused by various pieces of equipment, and the equipment has physically injured them. And if that is not enough to stop a dog from doing what it was doing. I mean, I've seen dogs who chase cars who've been hit by cars. If being hit by a car and breaking your pelvis and your back legs is not enough to stop you chasing cars, then there's not a punisher in the world that will help you do that. So we've got to know that sometimes the messages from that dog brain are so shouty that you could injure your dog and your dog wouldn't care. And so for those dogs, you might as well make the switch anyway and start, teaching them the other stuff. And Heston was that dog. Heston has been that dog whose dog brain was so loud that I could have put any piece of equipment on him, he wouldn't have cared. So harnesses do not teach your dog to pull. At best, chokes, head halters, prong collars, shock collars may help you manage your dog. But they've got to have fallout, and one of those pieces of fallout is that they have consequences for us and about the dog wanting to be in our space. So you do need a well-fitting harness, and by which I mean you don't want one with a strap across the chest like the Junior and I do not like those because they restrict the dog's shoulder movement. There are things called easy walk harnesses, which I don't know how they're easy to walk because they're not even easy to put on, which again restrict the dog's shoulder movement, which makes it impossible for them to walk properly. So if your dog is pulling on a harness more than they would on a choke collar, that's because the choke collar was working to control the dog. But what it also means is that your dog hasn't learned to walk to heel on that choke collar. So if you are in a situation where you think, well, I can walk my dog now, but if I take this piece of equipment off them, I've not a cat in hell's chance. It's because your dog hasn't learned, because punishers don't teach your dog what to do, they teach them what not to do, at best. So there's a lot of myths about harnesses, and I think we need to dispel those myths that they teach dogs to pull, because they don't. What they do is to give dogs freedom, and that means the freedom from the other things that were controlling them maybe a little bit. So that's one thing that we have to change our mind on. And I have to say, I've got 2 super strong dogs and I use harnesses on all of them. What I do making that switch, if you've got a dog, and I work with clients who've got, 60 kilogram Great Danes and so on that are really pulling, and they need both, so they're doing the dual control. And so what I do there is put the longer lead on the longer lead on the neck or the head halter, and we just start small. I'm only starting with a clip a 1.5 meter lead to the head halter or the neck collar, whatever that is, and then a 2 meter lead. No, the other way around. 2 meter lead to the neck collar. It's on a handbrake. 2 meter lead to the neck collar or the head halter, and then a 1.5 meter lead to the harness. So it's just there just in case. Now, I will say, if you've got a dog who you think you need this and they're super strong and you're really struggling, you really, really, really could benefit from buying Janet Finley's book, Your End of the Lead. It's an amazing book and it's so helpful, and she teaches you different methods of how to hold the lead and different, there's different things that you can do, but I will say that using these methods, once I did a course on loose lead walking at my house, and I said to the people, because there were volunteers from our shelter, I said, who's the pulliest dog? And he said Scotty. So I took Scotty out, and by the end of the day he was walking on a loose lead. These things can be taught in a day and can easily be taught in a day. So what they can't be is easily generalized in the day. You can't go and do final boss level if you've only been walking loose lead on for an hour or so. So we need to have that kind of period of transition. But one of the things that we need to think about is getting a well-fitting harness that is a Y, and doesn't restrict the dog's movement. And a front clip one can give you a bit of that dual control. So Janet Finley explains that in a book. So she uses 2 leads. She uses one on the front, and one on the back. And she's kind of like, I don't know, gently not steering the dog, but there's both things going on. And she's doing a lot of free work as well in there. And it's all very calm and lovely and nice. And, teaching the dog that when we're on the lead, we just don't do this behaviour. So leads and long lines. So if you've got a dog who pulls, some dogs are going to stop pulling if you give them a 10-meter lead. Heston is one of those dogs, so he's not really very good at walking to heel, but if I give him a 10-meter lead, he never goes out of that 10-meter hula hoop. So a 10-meter lead is more than enough for him, because he just kind of trots and smells, trots and smells, trots and smells. He doesn't do the hoovering smell anymore on the lead. So the hoovering smell is where they've got nose down, tail up, and they're hoovering the smell. And they're just going along going, sniffing as they go, which Liddy does. And this is not nice lead behaviour. So I need not to put that kind of a dog on a 10-meter lead, because they just get to the end of the lead and they're off. What I need is a dog who occasionally lifts their head up if I'm going to use a longer line. And I need them to be able to interrupt that with longer periods of smelling. So Flicker was another one that she would investigate smells. Like, she dissected those smells. She was there for like 5 hours sometimes. No, that's a ridiculous statement, but she was there for a long time, longer than I wanted to be and longer than Heston wanted to be. But having a long line on her meant she could be back a bit. So she could be at, our hula hoop was 20 metres with me in the middle. And so Heston could be, almost 10 metres at one side. Flicker could be almost 10 metres at the other side. I was in the middle, and they both had freedom to kind of explore their smell. So long lines can be great and can solve a lot of problems. And you may never have to teach your dog to walk on a loose lead if you have a long line that, and they're not pulling that much. However, if you've got a dog who is a serial puller or a leaper or a lunger, or they do that hoovering, so hoovering, what they're doing is kind of like, sometimes it's tracking and sometimes it's just nose down. They're questing for a scent, and they haven't got the scent, but they're questing for it. So they're covering a lot of ground to kind of find the scent. That's why it's questing for it. But they don't have one under their nose at that time. And so scent hounds are notorious for doing this, and Liddy, not a scent hound, also does it, because all dogs can do it. They're not good dogs to have in a longer line, because they have no consciousness that they're actually going to get to the end of it. So I will start with dogs on a kind of a bit of a shorter one. I like between 2 or 3 meters. And it's really important to know how to handle your lead and to have the right kind of lead. So I see a lot of people with a lot of tension on the lead, and if you are worried that you'll drop the lead, if you are worried that the dog will get off the lead, if you are worried that you can't hold the lead, and if you don't have that focus and impulse control that I talked about earlier, then you're going to need to deal with that too. And so those are the kind of dogs where I'd be looking for something like a rubberized webbing lead, which are fairly smooth but grippy, so that the dog can't get out, can't go beyond. And I like a kind of quite a wide one. But Janet Finley in a book talks much more at length about the kind of leads that make a difference, and it does make an absolute massive difference. You know, I had a dog who was chasing cars, and he had a snoot loop on him and all kinds of other equipment to kind of stop him doing it. We switched him to a harness and a long line, and he started making better decisions straight away. So, you know, I don't like to talk about them being magic, but where 1 or 2 times it has been an act of magic to actually switch them to those things, and you know, to kind of work on that as well. Okay, so I talked about final boss level quite a lot. Don't take your dog into the final boss level of the game. You've got to choose your environment. So, if your dog needs to run, we've got the lovely Ronnie at Canny Park, and there's Canny Parks all over, you know, England and coming into France, which is great. Find a dog park or an enclosed field. Borrow your neighbour's garden if they need to run. But do not have running on lead unless you're doing canicross, you know, unless you've got a dog who's been taught to run on the lead, like canicross or during or any of those kind of things, then we don't run on the lead. We just don't run on the lead. So if you feel like your dog really needs to run, you may be dealing with a dog like Heston was, who's addicted to the adrenaline of it. And the problem with adrenaline is that we think that we're tiring the dog out, and we're not. So if your mindset is, I just hope that I can tire my dog out and then I'll be able to do some loose lead stuff. Well, maybe when they're 16, but I have to tell you, Flicker pulled like a demon when I first got her, and zigzagged like a spaniel. So adrenaline can make a dog into a super athlete instead of tiring them out. So if you're aiming to tire your dog out through needing to run, and the walk is the only physical exercise that they're getting, then you need to think about doing some different physical exercise, whether that's, you know, games in the house, whether that's a little bit of swimming maybe, whether that's, you know, doing a bit of whatever, agility with them in a controlled environment in a small field, or hiring a dog park and allowing them to get that out if you haven't got the garden space to do it. But if you're coming at it with a mindset of, I need to tie my dog out and then they will walk nicely on the lead, all you're doing is creating a super athlete who, you know, you've created a Usain Bolt of dogs. If you keep adding to that level of adrenaline, just exactly as I did. So tiring your dog out in order to get them to walk nicely on the lead, never going to work. So if you're worried that while you're doing these things, because I'm going to suggest to you that you're going to break your walks down into something much smaller and you don't cover as much territory. If you're worried that going from a 5 or 10 kilometre trot to covering only a kilometre, for instance, on loose lead, is going to have detrimental effects on your dog's physical abilities, or your dog's physical, and it's not going to meet your dog's physical needs, then address those needs differently. Okay, not on the walk. A walk is not a place to get rid of physical energy. And you've got to change that mindset for your own self, I think. Like I said, you've got to start in the home. So if your dog can't eat in the home, if your dog can't focus on you in the home, if your dog can't cope with frustration in the home, if your dog hasn't got impulse control in the home, then they're not going to be able to do it anywhere else either. I've talked a lot already about thinking of it like computer game skills, that you're really leveling up. So don't start at the final boss level. Don't take them into the forest and expect them to be able to do it there. Don't take them in front of a cow field if your dog's got issues with cows. Don't take them into, you know, really stinky, smelly environments. Start with the places where you can win. So, for instance, there's a stretch where we go on a walk where Liddy never pulls and Hester never pulls. It's tarmacked. There's some grass. You know, it's not bad. It's a 300-metre stretch where we could walk up and down there all day and there would be loose lead. So start with those fights where you can win. It's actually, from the previous video, it's the bit just before where we were on the previous video. And level up when you're both ready. So when you feel confident to level up, then, and your dog is ready to level up as well, then you can do it a little bit more. So leveling up in house might be, you start in the kitchen or wherever your dog gets normally fed. Then you move it to the living room. You know how many dogs are fed in the living room or the bathroom? That would be a weird one for most dogs. Moving on to a veranda and then into the garden. Just a word of warning that some dogs find the garden more arousing than being on a walk. So you might actually you might bypass the garden altogether. Places for very scent directed dogs and also dogs who are very visual might be things like industrial parks. So Liddy is very attracted to movement of things. I did a video over yesterday and there were like just very, very tiny things moving, tiny, tiny. And she was massively over aroused. Industrial parks don't have those on a Sunday. So, you know, they can be really good places to kind of go and do a little bit of practice where there's not so many smells or not so many smells that are interesting to dogs. Car parks are another one. Supermarket car parks, especially on off hours. I know it's not so easy at the moment with curfews. Tarmac smells less than gravel. Gravel smells less than grass. So be mindful of these things, that if you're asking your dog to walk along a grassed or foresty field, especially where you've got hedgerows and things like that, you're walking your dog, you're doing final boss level. You're not doing the easy levels first. You're doing the complicated stuff. So dial it back a bit and go where the competition isn't. So or make it easier for your dog. So for Liddy, livestock is actually worse for her than wildlife. Wildlife, it's not penned in either, and quite often will be fairly distant, apart from the pigs that were the wild boar that were ferreting around really near us the other day. So it's more sensible for me to go and walk her in the forest. Easier. I haven't done any videos with her outside a cow field yet because it's just not going to happen. Whereas with Heston, cows are easier for him than wildlife. So, it's about going where the competition isn't. And so I'm going to introduce you now to the Hagrid technique. So this is Hagrid. Hagrid was an absolute sod. When he was overexcited, he'd get mouthy, but he would leave kind of like, he never left a mark on you, but you would feel it the day after. And so he's an intimidating kind of dog, and he would also sidle up to you for treats. And the first time I saw Hagrid, he had another volunteer pinned up against the wall, and he was just eating out of her bag, out of her treat bag. And so he'd basically got both of his paws on her. She was stood against the wall, and he was just eating. He had no cares. Once I've taken him to have his photos done in fact, it was the same day as this photo was taken, and these photos are actually better, if I do say so myself. We've taken him to have some photos taken by some student photographers who wanted to help us promote the long stay dogs in our shelter, and they wanted Hagrid off the lead, and I remonstrated and said this is not possible, and they complained, and I thought, oh, what the hell, you're complaining that much about the lead being on him and not being able to edit a lead out of a photograph. God's sake, that's so simple, Photoshop 101. So I just thought, have at it. I took the lead off him, and what he did is he ran over. You know how French people like to set out aperitifs and things like that with little snacks? Hagrid went over and helped himself, and nobody could stop him. So he was a dog who helped himself all the time, and would help himself from human beings. He would root in your pockets if you felt like it. So he did have some manners, and that dog brain wasn't always in the driving seat. Sometimes the grey matter was. But he would sidle up to me and get closer and closer and closer. And because I didn't like him walking that close to me, because he really was, and he would nip your calves as well and your thighs, I would throw a treat away for him. So I would throw the treat away, which would give me about 2 seconds of respite, and then, hello, and he would come sidling back in again and get that close to me again, and I would throw the treat diligently again, and he would sidle in, hello, I would be like, throw the treat away, and I'd be throwing the treat further away and leaving it longer periods of time. And what I realised is Hagrid had taught me perfectly how to walk to heel. So eventually we were walking 500 to 600 metres with Hagrid going, hello, 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 I'm just near you, I'm not looking at you, I'm not after a treat whatsoever, but just far too weird and near and creepy. So I was using the food because he was weird and near and creepy, big and a bit intimidating and liked to help himself, and kind of going, oh, get away from me, and using the food to kind of get him away from me. And what I did was actually the best trick that I've ever seen for walking the dog on a lead, on a loose lead. So this is the method. So when the dog moves near you, and you've got to imagine your dog is like super creepy, intimidating and frightening. Okay, you're going to skim a treat, not longer than the length of the lead, so it has to be less far than the end of that lead, but you're going to skim the treat just into the whatever to get them away from you. So imagine you're actually trying to get the dog to move away from you, rather than trying to get the dog in your space. And you just fling the treat, fling it carefully so it doesn't go longer than the lead and they don't end up going too far. And when the dog comes back to you, do it again, just exactly like I did with Hagrid. And again, you've got to have a dog who will eat to do this method. So you've got to practice it in the house first, practice it in your garden first, practice it where, just before your dog's food, practice it then, just before you put the bowls down. And when they come back to you, and they're going, hello, hello. Don't, unless you want that stargazer, hello, I love you. Don't, you really don't want to be rewarding the eye contact necessarily, but the physical space near you, the physical proximity. Just throw the treat away. And when they come back for more, just do the same again. And when you've got a good habit, so you start with all that you start is with the dog's near, throw the treat. The dog's near, throw the treat. And you do that maybe 2 or 3 days. And you maybe do that 10 or 12 times on a walk. So I just do it little gradual, boom, and the back again, boom, back again, boom, back again. When you've got that good habit, what you can do is add a phrase like walk with me. So I'll say walk with me, throw the treat, they go away, and then they come back and I say, and as they're on the way back, I'll say walk with me. And when the dog moves in, I'll throw the treat away. And then as they're moving back, I'll say walk with me, throw the treat away. So eventually, and this is what happens now, I'll say, walk with me. And no matter what the dogs are doing, no matter what they're smelling, the dogs come back because they know the game is about to start, the Hagrid game. So that's the method. And so hopefully we will have another video here of me. I just have to say, Heston is on 2 kinds of drugs that make him very hungry. So it's a bit more stargazery than I'd like. Liddy, look at Liddy, the brown dog, because she's doing it just perfectly. So you've got to imagine this, and this is the kind of the situation that this is how we walk it. And I do this not often. I do this in the challenging bits now. I do this in the final boss level, and that's all. But you'll see kind of what's going on here. And all I'm doing is zipping that treat out to one side for Heston, and zipping the treat to the other for Liddy. You can see already, these are not dogs on the loose lead. Not dogs on the tight lead. So you can see Liddy on the left, she's looking for the treat. She's actually found a biscuit I dropped earlier. It's important as well to get out of the habit of walking in a straight line, so I'll talk about that. And she's looking, and then she's back with me, and I reset us. Heston's already reset because it's like there's food, and there's my first. Now look how far I throw that, I'm stupid. And then boom, lead tug. So I'm just teaching her to pull on the lead there. Oh well. One for him, long lead, no tension in it. One for her, same. And there I find my rhythm. Can you see this? It's like knitting, isn't it? Weaving one in, weaving the other out. He's in. But look how close she is to me. And look at him now when I've thrown that treat. He's like, I'm coming straight back to you. Boom. Throw my treat again. So you just got to imagine your dog disgusts you and you don't want them anywhere near you. Now, I do this at the beginning of walks now, and I don't do it everywhere else because I'm just kind of getting them used to being in my presence. I want them in my hula hoop. And the only time these dogs are pulled at this point is when I threw that treat too far. Now, turn around and look how she repositions herself. So she's just going to move over to the other side. There she is, back in place. Heston's a bit too stargazery for me. He's walking like Hagrid did. Which is a problem of this method, and I'll talk to you about how to avoid that problem. But look at Liddy, she's doing it perfectly. She eyes forward. It's like I said, get a shepherd. This is a dog that I could not walk through the forest. I couldn't. I was afraid to walk her through the forest because she was pulling so hard. He misses it there. And we've just got this weaving in and out. And sometimes I reward her for, just being near me. Look at those nice smiley leads, leads in that kind of U shape there. That's what we're after. So that's the Hagrid method basically, is instead of wanting them to be near you and rewarding them for being near you, what you're using the treat as is a method of testing and proofing whether they're going to come back to you. And so it actually works quite a lot better, I find, than kind of rewarding the dogs at your heel. So a lot of trainers, for instance, will reward the dog for being at their heel. So what they do is they just have the dog next to them and they'll do things like hand touch and things like that, and just make it really interesting for the dog to be in their hula hoop. This method sends the dog to the limits of the hula hoop and is testing and rewarding being in the centre of the hula hoop instead. So actually, I don't know, there's something about it that just really, really worked. And we use it quite a lot in dog training. You know, we do use it with mat training as well to get the dog off the mat and things like this. So we do it all the time. We do it with the Get It game, for instance. The Get It game is really testing whether the dogs can come back to you. And this is just the same, really, but on the move. So it's really just Get It on the move, I would guess. So shaping is basically where you take that initial behaviour. So I don't want to be doing that all the time. I do not want to have to give my dog 500 treats on a walk. That's not what I want. And I also, you know, I want to kind of shape it into something better. So I want to reward only the longer or closer approaches. So I may be over 2 or 3 weeks in a fairly simple environment where I know the dogs will win, we'll be doing the Hagrid game. And then I'll make it a little bit harder, and I'll only reward the best of the, you know, the closest, the ones where you couldn't get a cigarette paper between us, or where they're doing it longer. So I don't also, apart from Heston with his stargazer, reward the head turn, not only because that's bad for the dog's neck, but also they can't see what they're walking into, and so I don't like that. So I only reward when the dog's looking forward, and then I will say yes and throw the treat. And we can stretch it out. So what I mean by this is something that's called the 300 peck method. The 300 peck method says it's how do you get a chicken to peck 300 times for one piece of grain, to peck the floor for that. And you start with getting them to peck for 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. So you count 1, 2, 3, 4, food. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, food. And you do the same with this. This is exactly what I did with Hagrid. So I would count the time out, and you can count it out loud or you can count it in your head. If the dog fails, you go back to 1 and you start again. So right now with Heston and Liddy, we're up to 300 paces where I'm counting it out in my head because I'm that weird, where I'm not giving any food and they're walking nicely to heel without doing that stupid stargazer looking at me for food. So that's all you do, is that once you've got it, and once the dog knows the game that you're playing, you start then going 1, 2, get it. Or walk with me. 1, 2, 3, get it. Walk with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, get it. Walk with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, get it. Walk with me, until you're doing, you know, until you're just doing it. And there comes a point long before you get to 300 paces where your dog just gets it and they stop pulling. It really does happen. And so then there are just some kind of final tips for, which I'm sure you'll be glad at because I know I'm running late, for the recalcitrant learners. So these are the ones for where it's really struggling. For the real, you know, the dogs who've got no history of learning, the dogs who just like not very motivated by any kind of learning, which hounds just not, they're not designed to be that kind of dog, and huskies neither. You know, they're not designed to win obedience competitions. They're not designed to work with us in that same kind of way. So for the dogs who are really struggling, we definitely need more focus and impulse control games at the beginning in the home, and you've got to scale it up more slowly. You know, it's going to take you a long time. Just like if I were teaching my grandmother to play Mortal Kombat, you know, it's going to take her a very long time to reach boss level compared to a teenage lad. I would also say read Janet Finley's Your End of the, it's not leash, that's very American, Your End of the Lead, which is an amazing book, and it's very much about the relationship we have with our dogs, but also has great leash handling skills and gives you a lot of ideas about how to handle a lead better and to feel more confident. I do stop, and you do need, if you're going to stop, so you're using a different form of training here. If you're going to stop and stand still and wait for your dog to reset, you're going to have to deal with their frustration at not being able to move forward. And so that in itself can be a problem for a dog that's excited and aroused and frustrated, because then you'll get dogs who are barking at you out of frustration or pulling forward and lunging to, but I do stop and I reset. So I just kind of stop. Sometimes I even pretend to get my camera out and just take a photo, because I know my dogs settle when I do that. I will also sometimes walk in, I do a big circle like lunging a horse, but just without a whip. So the circling can be good for dogs who are trotting, and I give them a treat as they come back around at the final circle. So you'll see videos of me doing this method with Liddy. But if my dogs are a bit overexcited and they are trotting on the lead, because I think a lot of it is about stopping that trotting. I don't care what my dogs are doing as long as they're walking, but it's the trotting that causes the problems for me. So it's about also reinforcing walking behaviours. And if my dogs are trotting, I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, maybe I can do just a little bit of this. And what they do is they slow down when they come back round for the treat. But that in itself is a skill, and it's not for everybody, because it can add to frustration if your dog's not used to being able to cope with that. But I find circling can be quite good for occasional lunges. So I sometimes do it with me. If Heston gets to the end of his 10-metre, he gets to the edge of the hula hoop, I'll just say, come round. And so he comes back, I wind the lead back in, because it's not an extendable lead, it's a flat, long line. I wind it back in, and we take a little bit of time to approach the place, because it usually starts running when or trotting when there's something interesting ahead to smell. And what they need there is not actually to go faster, they need to go slower. Walking backwards, so I walk backwards and my dogs are walking forwards, is quite a useful skill. Because they can't go past you. If they go past you, well, what would be the point in that? No treat. So teaching them to walk towards you while you're walking backwards is one way to reset them. And I do quite a lot of that I especially do that if they see something. This is very good for visual pullers that are pulling towards, I don't know, cars or livestock or, hares or rabbits or whatever. I'll quite often say, walk with me. So it's just exactly the same. And I walk backwards, they're walking towards me. I watch the thing skipping past whatever it is, and my dogs are like completely oblivious. So walking backwards can also slow them down as well. I like a let's go, so you've seen that in the video, and I think that's important. Stop going in one direction. Dogs know, they know that we go in one direction. A lot of the less positive methods, there's an awful guy whose video comes up after me, and I don't know what it is, but he's just got this, I don't know, he doesn't look like a bad puller. He's definitely not a bad puller compared to a lot of the dogs I know and have had and owned and caused. But what he's doing is just basically walking the dog backwards and forwards. So even if you watch the most offensive trainers in the whole world, a lot of what they're doing is just walking. It's disrupting the dog's expectation that you're going to go forwards. So a let's go is really nice. And Emily Larlam Kiko Pup has a really nice let's go video, which is the one I use myself, but you'll find that on the teaching parameters page. And I do stop and wait for my dog to reset. So, for instance, like I said on Sunday, I stopped and I sat down and I just went, right, you're really interested in this spot. I don't know what there is here, but it's interesting for you. So I just stop, we rest, we have that's where I get my rucksack picnic out now, and my rucksack game, and that's where we stop. And we reset, and then when we calm down and we've all chilled out and we've all gone, wow, in the universe, brilliant. I will tell you, this is horrible when it's cold and wet and rainy and your dog is really interested and you just want to move on, but hey ho, get a good coat. So that, learners that find it particularly hard. And so just some final other tips. If you've got two dogs that do it, you've got to do one at once. You absolutely can't do this with two dogs at the same time. So I had to train Liddy and Heston separately and do a lot of that work until they had the knowledge of the skills that I was asking them to do, and we could do it together, because they cause excitement in the other. You could also maybe hire a dog walker and invite a friend or two, of course after confinement is over. But if you need two people walking dogs because it's too difficult to, or more, because if you've got 6 dogs or whatever, don't try and do it all at once, because you'll never win. You're trying to win final boss level on 5 different computers in that skill. You're doing that thing in chess, aren't you, where you play multiple opponents and it's just not worth it. You're never going to win. So you be still if your dogs are really investigating. If you want to let them sniff, encourage that still sniffing. I'd much rather a flicker who stops and investigates the smell for 25 minutes than a dog who's hoovering up smells. I want them that stillness and calmness, not kind of fueling that adrenaline and excitement. Stop walking in a straight line, as I said. One of my favourite things to do is stop. If I normally do 3 kilometres or 4 kilometres with my dogs, I normally do an hour, so I'm guessing about 4 or 5 kilometres or so. Then I'll go, okay, well, you can't cope with this. I'm going to take you to a place where you can cope, and we'll just do that 10 times. And by the 10th time, if you can't get the heel work there, and the loose lead walking, then that environment is, again, it's too hard. So even if you're only doing, I did on Sunday, we didn't go very far. I think there were hunters, so I just had a very, very small spot, and we didn't go more than 300 meters from the car in either of those cases, but we still did 3 kilometers. And if they can't cope with that, then that's too hard, and you're working at a level that you need to kind of move back down, and then it will be time to maybe go to the industrial parks, play some games, have some snuffle mats, do a rucksack walk, picnic, and things like that. And I would say with a puppy, you can expect all or nothing. You can teach them to walk heel and to do nothing else, or to walk loose lead and to do nothing else. But with adult dogs, I think it would be so frustrating to kind of go, okay, 0 tolerance from today onwards, that we can build these things over time. So I don't expect my dogs to do this, 100% of the time. I don't expect perfection all of the time. There'll be times, like I said, on I can't remember when it was, but Lydia lunged on a thing and it, nearly pulled my arm out the socket. But it's hard to expect that kind of that all or nothing all of the time. And I would also say we have that kind of time expectation, don't we? I've got to get back home and do this. I've got work. I've got phone calls to do. I've got blah, blah. So normally if I do 3 kilometres or 4 kilometres in 45 minutes, an hour, then I'll double or triple my time. And so for the 3 kilometre walk on Sunday, where we didn't really go more than 300 metres from the car, and we went one road, we went the other road, we went the other road, we did the one road 5 or 6 times because it was very interesting. We did another road 4 or 5 times, we did one only 2 because it was boring. One I lay down in the middle of the field while the dogs smelled something for about 5 minutes. I was out there for 2.5 hours and we didn't do any distance, but my dogs were really calm and they didn't pull for one single instant. So I think those kind of tips are really important. So I know that's a lot longer than my usual normal thing. I don't know whether it would have been quicker if I'd done it live. Hopefully you'll understand that it's a really hard skill. It's as hard as recall. I will say all of these things help with recall. So if I say walk with me, Heston's sometimes off the lead. If I say walk with me, he's right back. That's his recall signal. As well as this kind of like heel walking signal. So they all help because they're building up the relationship with your dog and they're making it valuable to be in your space rather than to be out in the wilds. And all of these things are skills that you'll build up over time. You're not ever going to have, I hate to say this, but there are no magic bullets. There's no equipment that you can buy that will turn your dog from a super strong puller today into a magnificent dog tomorrow. And anybody who's got that magic tool, well, what happens when you take that tool off? Because is your dog really learned to walk to heel? And most of the time it's not. Which means that the tool is super aversive to your dog. And that can be a harness, make no bones about it. That can be any piece of equipment can be absolutely aversive to your dog and make it really unpleasant for them to walk or uncomfortable. Like Amigo, he never wore a harness because he was that uncomfortable in the harness, he was that conscious of it, and he was old. That to teach him to walk in a harness and to do all the things and to use a super light harness and, start with those, it would have just been offensive to him. It would have taken longer than it was to actually just, to teach him loose lead on a neck collar, which he already did. So, I think we have got to get rid of that expectation that it should be easy, or that our dogs should respect us, or that they're being stubborn or disobedient, or they're naughty, or the wrong breed, or they're not designed to walk to. We've got to take all of these things and kind of say, actually this takes work, and even the people who work on it all the time, like one of my favourite trainers is Denise Fency, and she's got a Tervarin that she's training at the moment, a young one, and the amount of work that woman puts in with that dog, you know, to get that loose lead heel work, it is just phenomenal. People put a lot of work into this. Trainers put a lot of work into this. So, you know, you can see Liddy in that last video walking lovely to heel, and pretty much that's how she walks now. She finds it tougher in new environments, so I get my deck chair out, we sit for 5 minutes, she gets to calm down. Heston gets, he has treats while she, you know, is over aroused, and then when we're ready and when she's ready, we move on and we do it at her pace. And it's not a hardship to me to sit on my deck chair for 5 minutes while she chills her beans and while Heston has a treat. So I think we have got to stop that kind of all or nothing approach and reassess how we're walking our dogs, rather than thinking that we can continue doing what we're doing, because what we are always doing is putting our dogs in final boss level and putting ourselves in final boss level when neither of us are ready for it. And so that's why we've got to kind of take it back down and really start from the beginning and build it up again. So it may take you, like it's taken me 6 months to get to the point where I can loose lead walk Liddy and Heston at the same time. And that's fine, you know, we practice a little every day. I'm really super lazy. I don't go out of my way to train them. I just do a little bit on every single walk that we've got. And what's happened is over time that pulling has completely reduced. I don't need to have 2 leads on her anymore. I can now start to put her on a 5 metre or a 10 metre lead at certain points in a walk, and she's much less aroused and therefore also much less dangerous, because that's the other problem with Liddy. And for Heston, you know, it's well known that epilepsy is caused by excitement and stress, or provoked by excitement and stress. So I really don't want him getting over aroused on a walk. And for his health and his, you know, continued lack of fits, it's really important he doesn't get over aroused, because it's just going to cause him all kinds of health problems later. So there are lots of reasons why we can do this. And I have to say, you know, I started yesterday's talk actually talking about my dogs as if they were perfect, and without remembering and reminding you that my dogs were absolute sods, and that some of the dogs, when I was thinking about it, some of the worst and hardest pullers dogs in the refuge are actually some of the easiest dogs to train. I can't remember, it was Loose Stick. There was a great big Labrador Shepherd cross. He was an absolute demon. He took to 300 peck, you know, like that. So he was walking to heel, bam, and we did 300 pecks, so we just 1 2 treats, 1 2 3 treats, 1 2 3 4 treats, 1 2 3 5 4 5 treats. He was walking perfectly without pulling, just like that. No equipment. So sometimes there are magic tricks, and you can eventually start to feed them out, because that's the other thing about food, is that then you can phase it out. So now I'm using much less food on walks, simply because I don't need to anymore, and we can use it in much more fun ways. So I will leave you there, coming up on the 2-hour mark. So hopefully you've got yourself a good cup of coffee in the middle of that at some point. And if you've got any questions about that, you can certainly ask me if you're having particular problems. But don't take it as something that your dog's old, or they've got a lifetime habit of pulling, as something that you can't change, because it's absolutely something that you can change. But sometimes we've got to do the foundations before we can get to the Hagrid stuff.